Welcome to the Republican majority in the 118th Congress. House Republicans are hitting the ground running, and we are laser focused on passing our Commitment to America agenda and much needed critical oversight of the Biden administration. Yesterday, we passed the most member-driven and transparent rules package in history and finally ended Democrats' authoritarian reign on our nation's capital. We restored and fully opened the People's House. Our first orders of legislative business have been exactly what we promised to the American people. We promised on day one to repeal Joe Biden's army of 87,000 new IRS agents, and yesterday we did just that. Today, we will counter the Chinese Communist Party with our Select Committee on China. We will vote to protect every American's constitutional rights with the new Select Subcommittee on the weaponization of the federal government. We will also vote to stop the Biden administration from selling our strategic petroleum reserves to China. And of course, this week, as thousands prepare to stand for life in our nation's capital next week, we will continue to hold the line and protect the most vulnerable among us by bringing the Born Alive Survivors Protection Bill to the floor. And we are just getting started. House Republicans are unified and united in our effort to implement our commitment to America to save this country.
The rules package last night was very basic. With the exception of some church language, I think our leaders said there really were no changes. These were voted on before, that and the motion to vacate that went from 5 members down to 1. The other agreement is an agreement that the entire conference is going to hold themselves to in their leadership. It has to do with single subject matter bills. It has to do with eliminating Christmas trees, and I think Morgan Griffith said it best. We're not going to see any longer, if we enforce these agreements amongst ourselves, we're not going to see where the House sends over a coin bill to the Senate, which is a ceremonial type piece of legislation, which they sit on, and then ultimately they strip it and they fill it with, I believe it was the Inflation Reduction Act, and they send it back is the coin bill. That will no longer be acceptable in the House, which I would argue, and I think we heard this from one of our members this morning in conference, Morgan Griffith, this will arguably not make Kevin McCarthy a weaker speaker. This will make Kevin McCarthy perhaps the strongest speaker in modern times, this agreement. And there'll be more on that to come.
Why not release to the public all these deals that were reached, this screenshot that was showed in conference? You guys talk about transparency. Isn't it essential for the American public to understand exactly what deals were cut in order for him to get the speakership?
Well, the Speaker talked about that today, and some of the things involved making sure that our committees are represented by a full swath of our membership. It wasn't any person was committed a committee, but look, we've got a lot of different groups within our conference. The Democrats do as well, by the way, and we want to make sure, and this is something the steering committee is going to take up. So again, it wasn't like this person's allowed that spot on a committee. The steering committee is going to make that decision. But if we're going to be able to do our business, I'd love for the Democrats to vote with us.
House Democrats are ready. In the 118th Congress, we stand united behind Hakeem Jeffries, whose leadership is astounding, bold, courageous, decisive. You get the point. The chaos and crisis on the other side of the aisle has not stopped House Republicans. After caving to demands from extremists in their conference, Speaker McCarthy has a secret 3-page list of promises that will prevent his caucus that he had to put in place to prevent his caucus from voting down their own rules package. Rather than trying to find common ground, House Republicans have chosen a path of division and default. We've not seen a single concrete proposal from Republican leadership that will lower costs for everyday Americans. Instead, they've ratcheted up their attacks on women's reproductive rights, against voting rights legislation, and against codifying Roe v. Wade. When they're ready to get serious about the most pressing issues of facing this country, House Democrats stand ready to work with them to deliver. Until then, we're going to continue to call out their extremism each and every step of the way.
So the Republican rules package says that you cannot hire any staff to the Office of Government Ethics after 30 days. Why would they do that? Like you should ask them, what is the rationale for doing that? Well, the rationale is to shrink this office, because if anyone leaves after 30 days, they don't get replaced. And eventually, there's going to be no one in that office, because they don't want the office investigating people like George Santos. And as Chairman Aguilar noted, arguably George Santos was the deciding vote for Kevin McCarthy for Speaker. It was also disclosed yesterday that when George Santos was fundraising, apparently his fundraising person was telling folks that he was actually Kevin McCarthy's chief of staff. So if they were using the telephones, which I assume they were, that would essentially be conspiracy to commit wire fraud. So what George Santos did was not only unethical, it appears to be highly illegal. And you have ethical investigations, but also you have what looks to me like criminal liability. I think Speaker McCarthy needs to talk about what he thinks about George Santos and really put him up for condemnation or an expulsion vote from this Congress.
You guys are populating committees this week. Speaker McCarthy's reiterated his desire to not seat Adam Schiff or Eric Swalwell on the Select Committee on Intel, should their names be put forward. Is it the caucus's intention to put their names forward to be seated on that committee? And what happens if Speaker McCarthy follows through on that threat and strikes them from the Intel Committee?
That's a steering for Leader Jeffries, as well as a steering and policy committee. So steering and policy will meet once we have the ratios. In negotiation with the majority, we'll have those ratios. We will populate our committees, and we will send the names of the individuals who this caucus supports and are qualified to serve on committees. What the Speaker does beyond that is something that we will handle, and I know you have a bunch of hypotheticals for me, but it isn't anything that we're going to get into today. So the process.
The chairman, presumably he's not going to be left out of the bottom on a ratio question.
The process is that the caucus will advance the nominees and the individuals who we feel best reflect the Democratic caucus, our democratic values, and have the ability to lead, including ranking member Schiff. And so they will be put forward. What the Speaker does beyond that is something that that the leadership team and the steering and policy committee will have to handle.